It was a bright, crisp morning when the sun shone down on Westminster Abbey, its ancient walls echoing with centuries of tradition. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation and the hush of reverence as dignitaries from across the world gathered to witness the coronation of King Charles III. The air smelled faintly of old wood, polished silver, and the rich scent of ceremonial incense. Charles stood tall at the altar, his ceremonial robes flowing around him like a river of velvet and gold. His face carried the weight of a man who understood the magnitude of the role he was about to assume. As the archbishop prepared to place the crown upon his head, Charles's mind swirled with 100 thoughts. Memories of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose legacy still loomed large. Memories of his youth spent learning what it meant to be a leader, and memories of every sacrifice he had made to be here, in this moment. The crown felt heavy, both literally and figuratively. As it settled on his head, a hush fell across the abbey, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow every breath. Charles looked out across the sea of faces, politicians, foreign dignitaries, old friends, and distant cousins. Some eyes gleamed with admiration, others with calculation. A few faces, shadowed and cold, were harder to read. He wondered which ones were his true allies and which ones were waiting for him to fail. In the front row, his son, Prince William, smiled proudly. Camilla, the queen consort, watched him with gentle strength. Both of them represented the promise of family, of support he would need in the days ahead. But there were also subtle undercurrents in the room, whispers of doubt about his readiness to rule, about his vision for the monarchy in a rapidly changing world. The archbishop's voice rang out, calling for oaths of loyalty and service. Charles's voice, strong and clear, echoed through the abbey as he pledged to uphold the laws, protect his people, and lead with honor and compassion. The crowd responded with a chorus of "God Save the King," and the organ thundered a triumphant anthem that shook the very stones beneath his feet. But as Charles stepped forward to greet his subjects and dignitaries, he felt the faintest chill, a sense that all was not as it seemed. In a far corner of the abbey, a figure shifted uncomfortably, a man whose eyes darted restlessly. Charles's gaze paused for a moment, catching a glimpse of a familiar face, Jonah Hill, the celebrated actor-turned-activist, standing among the invited guests. He looked out of place, a mischievous glint in his eyes that sent a shiver down Charles's spine. Jonah's presence at the coronation struck Charles as odd. They had met briefly at charity events in the past, but Jonah had always seemed polite, if distant. Now, his grin looked almost triumphant, as if he knew a secret no one else did. Charles pushed the thought away, focusing instead on his duties. There would be plenty of time to worry about potential problems later. As the ceremony concluded, Charles led the procession out of the abbey, his crown glinting in the sunlight. The crowd outside erupted in cheers, waving flags and shouting his name. It was a moment of triumph, a new era for the monarchy, a fresh beginning. But even as he waved and smiled, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, a trap was being set. A shadow lurked behind the pageantry and celebration, a shadow that wore a smirk and called itself Jonah Hill. Little did King Charles III know that his reign had just begun, and that the real test of his leadership was already taking shape. As the sun set on the day of his coronation, King Charles III returned to Buckingham Palace, the cheers of the crowd still ringing in his ears, though the celebrations continued late into the night, with dinners, speeches, and fireworks. Charles felt a gnawing unease beneath the surface of his excitement. Every time he glanced at a shadow or turned a corner, he half expected to see Jonah Hill lurking, his sly smile ready to reveal a secret. Jonah Hill's presence at the coronation had unsettled Charles. He couldn't shake the feeling that Jonah had been watching him not with respect, but with something far more dangerous: calculation. After the ceremony, Charles's private secretary, Edward Hawthorne, brought him a stack of briefing papers and congratulatory letters from heads of state. Charles flipped through them absently, his mind drifting back to that brief moment when Jonah's eyes had locked with his. "What do we know about Jonah Hill?" Charles asked, his voice low, his tone urgent. Edward adjusted his glasses. "He's an actor, Your Majesty, known for his comedic roles. Recently, he's become quite active in philanthropy and certain, well, controversial causes. Nothing official, but some say he's involved with groups that challenge the monarchy's role in modern society." Charles frowned. "He was at the coronation. I want to know why. Have the security team look into it." "Yes, Your Majesty," Edward said, his face tightening with concern. Across town in a luxurious penthouse, Jonah Hill sat by a large window overlooking the city. He nursed a glass of whiskey and watched the fireworks burst in the sky. But his eyes were cold, his smile thin. In front of him lay a leather-bound notebook filled with notes, diagrams, and sketches, plans that had taken months to prepare. Jonah had never been content with just acting. He had always been fascinated by power, how it worked, how it could be taken away. His path had crossed with Charles's a few times at charity events and public appearances. Jonah had always sensed a vulnerability in the king, a man raised for a role he had never quite seemed comfortable in. Jonah believed that with the right push, Charles's carefully crafted image would shatter, leaving behind a monarchy that could finally be questioned and even broken. Jonah's ambitions had grown beyond Hollywood scripts and movie roles. He wanted to be the man who brought down a king. He wasn't working alone. Jonah had quietly built a network of allies, journalists hungry for a scandal, politicians eager to see the monarchy weakened, and tech experts skilled in manipulating information. Together, they planned to create a web of rumors and half-truths that would erode Charles's credibility. Jonah's strategy was simple: expose every perceived flaw, amplify every mistake, and turn the public's adoration into suspicion. Once the people began to doubt, the rest would crumble like a house of cards. Back at the palace, Charles tried to focus on the matters of state: reports from Parliament, discussions with the Prime Minister, meetings with international leaders. All of it demanded his attention. Yet, every time his mind drifted, it returned to Jonah's smirk. Charles had learned to handle critics and detractors, but this felt different. This felt personal. That night, as Charles lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he wondered if he was strong enough to face the challenge that Jonah represented. He thought of his mother's legacy, of the sacrifices he had made to stand where he was. He refused to let himself become the king who fell to a schemer's trap. In the darkness, Charles made a silent promise. He would not allow Jonah Hill to destroy the crown he had just inherited. Whatever Jonah was planning, Charles would be ready. A new battle had begun, one that would test his strength, his patience, and his very identity as a king. In the days following his coronation, King Charles III threw himself into the duties of his new reign. Meetings with Parliament, public appearances, and state visits filled his schedule. Yet, in quiet moments, he couldn't shake the memory of Jonah Hill's unsettling grin at the coronation, a grin that hinted at secrets and schemes hidden beneath the surface. Late one afternoon, Charles was meeting with his private secretary, Edward Hawthorne, in his study. The room was lined with shelves of old books, and the air carried the comforting scent of polished wood and leather. Edward looked uneasy as he placed a stack of newspapers on the table. "Your Majesty," Edward began, "there's something you should see." Charles took the papers and scanned the front pages. His eyes narrowed as he read headlines that sent a chill through his chest. "Royal finances in question." King Charles III accused of misusing funds. Sources say king unfit to rule. His heart pounded as he read the articles. They cited anonymous sources claiming that Charles had been reckless with palace funds, investing them in risky ventures that benefited his personal friends. One piece even hinted at secret offshore accounts. None of it was true, but the articles were cleverly written, mixing half-truths with outright lies. They were designed to sow doubt and chip away at his reputation. Charles looked up at Edward. How could this happen? These claims are completely false. Edward's expression was grim. It appears to be a coordinated smear campaign, Your Majesty. The reporters claim to have sources inside the palace, people who are feeding them these stories. Charles clenched his jaw. Who would betray me like this? Edward hesitated. It's hard to say. We have loyal staff, but rumors spread easily. All it takes is one person with the wrong motives, or someone who's been paid off. Charles felt a wave of frustration. He had barely begun his reign, and already someone was trying to undermine him. As he pondered the articles, his mind drifted back to Jonah Hill. Could he be behind this? Charles didn't want to jump to conclusions, but Jonah's presence at the coronation and the timing of these rumors felt like more than coincidence. That evening, Charles met with Camilla and Prince William in the drawing room. They sat close, their faces etched with concern. William leaned forward. Father, we need to get ahead of this. Deny the rumors publicly. Show them they can't push you around. Camilla nodded. And we need to find out who's behind it. If it's Jonah, he's dangerous. He's not just an actor anymore. He's smart, and he has influence. Charles took a deep breath. You're both right. We'll issue a statement refuting these claims, but I want our own investigation. Edward, bring me every report on staff interviews. I want to know who's leaking information and why. Edward nodded. I'll see to it immediately, Your Majesty. As the meeting ended, Charles looked out the window at the darkening sky. The city lights twinkled below like a million tiny stars, each representing a life he had sworn to serve. Yet in the darkness, shadows moved. Some friendly, some not. Jonah Hill's trap was starting to reveal itself, but Charles was determined not to be caught off guard. He knew that leadership wasn't just about ceremonies and titles. It was about facing challenges, even when they came from unexpected places. And in that moment, King Charles III resolved to stand strong, to fight for his people, and to protect the legacy he had inherited. Because he wasn't just a king in name, he would prove he was a king in heart. The days following the release of the damning articles tested King Charles III like never before. Every time he opened a newspaper, there was a new headline, each one more biting than the last. Words like scandal, betrayal, and unfit to rule splashed across the front pages, fueling public doubt and giving critics a reason to question his leadership. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere grew tense. Even the most loyal staff members seemed wary, casting nervous glances at one another, as though unsure whom to trust. Charles felt the pressure mounting on his shoulders, a weight that no crown could match. The responsibility to lead, to maintain dignity, to protect the monarchy, it all seemed to rest on him alone. Edward Hawthorne, his steadfast private secretary, worked tirelessly to manage the chaos. He arranged interviews with trusted reporters, clarifications with Parliament, and background briefings to correct the lies. Yet every time they put out one fire, another seemed to ignite. The leaks were persistent and well-timed, always striking when Charles had the least time to prepare. Your Majesty, Edward said one afternoon as they pored over documents in the study, we've traced some of the leaks to staff members who appear to have connections to organizations funded by... Jonah Hill, Charles interrupted, his voice low but firm. Edward nodded grimly. Yes, sir. It appears Jonah has been funneling money into activist groups that support Republican movements, those who want to see the monarchy abolished. Some of those same groups have ties to a few staff members here at the palace. Charles's hands tightened into fists. So Jonah's trap is bigger than I thought. He's using my own staff against me. It seems that way, sir, Edward agreed. And the public is starting to listen. Social media is filled with debates about whether you should step aside. A cold anger burned in Charles's chest. He had faced criticism before. He'd been scrutinized his whole life. But this felt different. This was an orchestrated attempt to break him down, to undermine the very foundation of the monarchy. And it was working. Public confidence was beginning to waver. Parliament members were starting to ask questions. Even some within his own family whispered about whether he was strong enough for the crown. That evening, Charles sat alone in the royal library. The room, with its towering shelves of books and soft golden lamplight, had always been his refuge, a place to think, to read, to escape. But tonight, even here, he felt no peace. His mind swirled with doubt. Was he really strong enough to lead? Could he weather this storm and emerge with his integrity and the monarchy intact? Or would Jonah Hill's trap succeed, leaving him a broken man with a tarnished crown? As he pondered, Camilla entered the room quietly, her eyes soft but determined. She sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Charles," she said gently, "you've faced challenges before. You've endured family scandals, press attacks, and the constant weight of expectations. But you've always emerged stronger. You must believe in yourself and in the people who believe in you." Charles met her gaze, his eyes tired but resolute. "You're right. I can't let Jonah or anyone else define me. I'm the king. I have a duty to the people, to my family, and to myself." He rose from his chair, his spine straightening with newfound resolve. "Edward," he called, "assemble the senior advisors. It's time we take control of this narrative. We'll find the source of these leaks and expose them, and we'll show the world that this crown isn't so easily toppled." As Edward hurried off to fulfill his orders, Charles turned back to Camilla. She smiled, proud of his strength. The struggle was far from over, but Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would not be a pawn in Jonah Hill's game. He would be a king worthy of his title, and he would fight back with every ounce of strength he possessed. Because even in the face of shadows and traps, the light of a true leader could never be fully extinguished. With a steely resolve, King Charles III launched a quiet but determined investigation into the leaks plaguing his reign. He worked closely with Edward Hawthorne and a small circle of trusted advisors, determined to root out the traitors within the palace walls. Every document was scrutinized, every suspicious email traced. Staff were questioned, but Charles insisted on fairness. He would not rule through fear, even as the trap around him tightened. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the media's frenzy only intensified. Late-night talk shows mocked the king's supposed financial mismanagement. Social media platforms erupted with hashtags calling for him to abdicate. Even some parliament members, eager for political gain, began to call for investigations into the monarchy's finances. Charles felt the pressure mounting from every side, yet he refused to back down. Jonah Hill, watching from the shadows, knew his plan was working. He had carefully orchestrated every rumor, every leak, every article. His goal wasn't just to embarrass Charles, but to erode the public's trust in the monarchy itself. Jonah believed that with enough doubt and confusion, the very foundation of the royal institution would crumble. In a small, dimly lit room somewhere in London, Jonah met with a group of his allies. Some were journalists, others were tech experts and social media influencers, each one chosen for their influence and their willingness to push his agenda. Jonah leaned over a table covered with laptops and printouts of headlines, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Look at the numbers," one of the influencers said, pointing at a graph on his screen. every post about the king's so-called scandals is getting shared thousands of times. People are buying the narrative." Jonah nodded. "Good. Keep it up. We're not just telling a story, we're building a reality. The more they doubt him, the weaker he becomes." Another conspirator, a political strategist, added, "We've even got a few MPs willing to raise questions in Parliament. It's all coming together." Jonah smiled. "Perfect. By the time Charles realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. The people will have already made up their minds." Back at Buckingham Palace, Charles stood in the war room, a small conference space now littered with maps, memos, and digital reports. Edward, pale and tired from sleepless nights, presented his findings. "Your Majesty," he began, "we've confirmed that Jonah's network is real. He's using social media to spread these lies, and some of his supporters have even infiltrated a few palace departments." Charles's jaw tightened. "So he's using every tool at his disposal: technology, the press, politics. He wants to weaken the very core of our institution." Edward nodded gravely. "Yes, sir, and he's very good at it." Charles took a deep breath. He had expected challenges as a monarch, but not a modern-day siege waged through the internet and newsrooms. Yet here he was, facing an opponent who didn't need armies, just a few clever lies and a willing audience. "Then we'll fight him where he's strongest," Charles declared. "We'll use the truth. We'll expose his lies, one by one, and show the people that the crown stands for integrity and honor." Edward hesitated. "That won't be easy, sir. Jonah's message is simpler. He's playing on people's fears and doubts. The truth is complicated." Charles's eyes hardened. "Then we'll make it simple. We'll be honest, open, and transparent. We'll show the people that while I am human and flawed, I will never betray their trust." That night, as the city's lights sparkled beyond the palace windows, Charles prepared a speech, one that would address the rumors head-on. He knew it wouldn't be enough to just defend himself. He had to inspire faith in the monarchy again. Meanwhile, in that small hidden room, Jonah Hill leaned back in his chair, confident that the king would walk right into the final stage of his trap. He had set the pieces in motion. Now all he had to do was watch as Charles stumbled. But what Jonah didn't yet understand was that a true king doesn't falter in the face of traps. He rises above them. Despite his best efforts to regain control of the narrative, King Charles III felt the weight of suspicion pressing down on his shoulders. Every room he entered at Buckingham Palace felt different now, darker, colder, as though a silent conspiracy had infected the very air. His staff carried on their duties with polite efficiency, but he sensed their unease. Whispers echoed in the hallways. Brief glances passed between colleagues, and Charles knew that trust, so vital to any kingdom, was slowly unraveling. Edward Hawthorne, his loyal private secretary, had been investigating the leaks with unwavering dedication. Each report he brought to Charles revealed more disturbing details. Conversations that had been recorded without permission, confidential documents that had found their way into the wrong hands, and staff members who had suddenly resigned without explanation. One rainy evening, Edward entered the king's study, his face ashen. He held a folder in his trembling hands. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice tight with emotion, "I believe we've found the source of the most damaging leaks." Charles's heart pounded. "Who is it, Edward? Tell me." Edward hesitated, eyes brimming with regret. "It's Jameson Wells, your senior communications advisor. He's been working with Jonah Hill's network." Charles felt as if the breath had been knocked from his chest. Jameson Wells had been more than just an advisor. He had been a friend. They had shared late-night discussions, strategy sessions, and even quiet moments of laughter in the palace gardens. The betrayal stung like a blade to the heart. "How did he do it?" Charles asked, his voice trembling. Edward cleared his throat, unable to hide his anguish. He had access to nearly everything, sir. Press releases, internal memos, even drafts of your speeches. He used his position to funnel information to Jonah's team. And he's been feeding them stories that distort your every action. Charles closed his eyes, his mind replaying every conversation he'd had with Jameson. How had he missed the signs? How could someone he trusted so completely be the very one tearing him down from within? Rage simmered just beneath the surface, but Charles refused to let it consume him. He knew that anger alone would not repair the damage. He needed to act calmly, decisively. "Where is Jameson now?" Charles asked, opening his eyes. Edward shifted uncomfortably. "He's in his quarters, sir. Should I have security detain him?" Charles stood, his posture straight and regal. "Number, bring him to me. I want to hear it from his own lips." Within the hour, Jameson Wells stood in the king's study, his expression a mixture of defiance and regret. The flickering fireplace cast shadows across the room, dancing over the portraits of monarchs past. "Your Majesty," Jameson began, his voice trembling but laced with a bitterness that cut deep. "You were never ready for this. The world has changed, but you're still clinging to an outdated institution. Jonah showed me the truth. He offered me a chance to help bring real change." Charles studied him, his face a mask of calm. "Change," he repeated. "And you thought betrayal was the way to bring it about?" Jameson's eyes flashed. "People deserve the truth, Charles. The monarchy is a relic. Jonah's plan is built on lies and manipulation," Charles interrupted, his voice rising with quiet authority. "You've let yourself be a pawn in a dangerous game. You betrayed not just me, but every single person who believed in you." Jameson looked away, shame crossing his face. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Charles shook his head. "Number, you let anger guide you instead of reason. You let ambition cloud your loyalty, and now you've endangered everything we've worked to build." He turned to Edward. "Have him escorted from the palace. His betrayal will be documented, and the authorities will deal with him." As the guards led Jameson away, Charles felt the weight of the betrayal settle deep in his chest, but he also felt a renewed sense of clarity. The enemy had shown his hand, and now Charles knew exactly what he was up against. Jonah Hill had turned one of his closest advisors, but Charles had weathered the storm and uncovered the traitor. Now, he could focus on the real threat, the man orchestrating it all from the shadows. A quiet determination filled him. He would not allow betrayal to define his reign. He would face Jonah Hill's trap, and he would fight back with everything he had. Because even in the darkness, the light of a true king would always find a way to shine. In the aftermath of Jameson Wells's betrayal, Buckingham Palace felt different, quieter, but also more resolute. The corridors no longer echoed with whispered suspicions. Instead, a determined calm settled over the staff who remained. King Charles III, having exposed the traitor, now turned his attention to the wider war Jonah Hill was waging against him. Early the next morning, Charles called a meeting with his most trusted advisors in the palace's small but secure strategy room. The walls were lined with centuries-old tapestries, and the faint scent of old books and polished wood filled the air. A large wooden table stood at the center, cluttered with reports, laptops, and steaming cups of tea. Edward Hawthorne was already there, alongside a few loyal aides, Sarah Mitchell, the palace's tech security chief, and Lord Chambers, a senior legal advisor. Each of them wore the weary look of people who had been working day and night to protect their king. "Your Majesty," Sarah began, "our investigation confirms that Jonah's network is using a sophisticated system of bots and paid influencers. They're amplifying every rumor and making it look like public opinion has turned against you." Charles leaned forward, his eyes sharp. So he's creating a false sense of outrage, making it seem like the monarchy is falling apart, when, in truth, it's his deception that's spreading. Edward nodded. Exactly, sir. He's also leaking forged documents, presenting them as evidence of misconduct. They're convincing at first glance, but when examined closely, they're full of inconsistencies. Lord Chambers added, "We can take legal action to challenge these forgeries, but it's a slow process. Jonah knows that by the time we clear your name, the damage may already be done." Charles exhaled slowly, thinking of every challenge he had faced since the day of his coronation. Every time he had chosen to stand with dignity rather than react in anger. But now he saw that his calmness had been used against him, his patience mistaken for weakness. He stood, the quiet strength of centuries of kings in his bearing. No more. His voice carried the weight of his ancestors and the power of his own resolve. We will fight him, not just with the law, but with the truth. Sarah, I want a secure platform, something we control, where I can speak directly to the people. No spin, no distortions. Just me and them. Sarah's eyes lit up. Yes, sir. We can build a verified channel that streams directly from the palace servers. Every word will be yours, and every viewer will know it's authentic. Edward leaned in. And we'll gather every piece of evidence we have, every forged document, every manipulated story, and we'll expose Jonah's network for what it is, a web of lies. Lord Chambers smiled, his respect evident. You're taking back control of the narrative, Your Majesty. That's what a true leader does. Charles nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. We will show the people that this monarchy stands for truth, honor, and unity. Jonah's lies will crumble under the weight of the truth. Outside, the rain fell in steady streams, but inside the palace, a fire had been lit. Plans were set in motion. Press teams were briefed. The palace's tech experts worked around the clock to create a secure broadcast. Charles spent hours drafting his message, ensuring every word spoke to the heart of the people he served. He practiced in the quiet of his private chambers, imagining the faces of his citizens, young and old, supporters and skeptics alike. He would speak to them not as a distant king, but as a man who understood their hopes and fears, a man who refused to be defeated by deceit. Because in the face of Jonah Hill's trap, Charles had found his resolve. He would not be defined by rumors or half-truths. He would be defined by his courage to stand up, to fight back, and to lead with honor. And as the day of his broadcast approached, the world would soon learn that King Charles III was no easy target, that even in the darkness, a true king's light could never be extinguished. The day of the broadcast arrived, a crisp, clear morning that carried a sense of both urgency and hope. Buckingham Palace bustled with quiet efficiency as the staff prepared the secure room where Charles would deliver his message. Technicians checked the cameras and tested the audio, ensuring every detail was flawless. This wasn't just another speech. It was the king's stand against the storm of lies that had threatened to engulf his reign. Charles stood before the mirror in his private quarters, adjusting his suit with measured care. No royal regalia, no ceremonial crown, just the man behind the monarchy. He wanted the people to see him as he truly was, a leader facing adversity with honesty and courage. Edward Hawthorne entered, carrying a folder of notes and a small earpiece. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "we're ready when you are." Charles turned, his eyes clear and resolute. "No earpiece, no script. I want every word to come from me. The people deserve nothing less." Edward hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his respect evident. "Very well, sir. Good luck." As Charles walked the short distance to the recording room, his mind played over the events that had led him here. Jonah's smirk at the coronation, the fabricated scandals, Jameson's betrayal. Every step brought him closer to the confrontation he knew was inevitable. He entered the room, the cameras already rolling. A single chair awaited him beneath soft, natural lighting. He took his seat and faced the lens, inhaling deeply. The technician counted down. 3, 2, 1. "Good evening," Charles began, his voice calm but firm. "Tonight I speak to you not as a distant monarch, but as a fellow citizen, one who, like you, has faced doubt, suspicion, and the sting of betrayal." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. In recent weeks, lies and falsehoods have spread through our society like wildfire. Allegations of financial mismanagement, questions about my fitness to rule, stories meant to erode the trust that binds us together. Many of you may have wondered if there was truth in these claims. I understand your fears. I, too, have felt their sting. His gaze sharpened. But let me be clear. These accusations are part of a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to divide us, to weaken the monarchy, and to break the bond between us. This campaign is led by a man who claims to stand for change, but uses deceit as his weapon, Jonah Hill. The room felt electric, as though every viewer at home could sense the gravity of the moment. Jonah Hill has manipulated the media, planted false stories, and even turned trusted advisors against me, Charles continued. But today, I stand before you with the truth. We have gathered the evidence, fake documents, doctored photos, and recordings twisted to serve a lie. These are the tools of a man who fears the light of honesty. He leaned forward slightly, his tone softening. I will not pretend to be a perfect man. I have my flaws, and I have made mistakes, but I have never betrayed my duty to this country. I have never put my own interests before yours, and I will never allow those who trade in deception to define who I am, or who we are as a nation. A hush fell over the room as Charles let the silence speak its own truth. Today, I call upon every citizen who values integrity to stand with me. Let us reject the lies that seek to divide us and reaffirm our commitment to unity, respect, and trust. The monarchy is not about one man, but about all of us, our history, our values, and our future. He paused, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. Jonah Hill will answer for his actions, but this is not just my fight. It is ours. Together, we will rise above the darkness of deceit and step into the light of truth. He stood then, a quiet strength radiating from him. Thank you. God bless you all. As the cameras faded to black, the staff in the room let out a collective breath. Edward stepped forward, his eyes shining. Your Majesty, that was incredible. Charles nodded, though his face remained somber. Now, Edward, we prepare for the next step. Jonah won't back down easily. He'll try to twist even this against us. Edward's expression hardened. Then we'll be ready, sir. We'll fight him at every turn. Charles looked out the window, where the city lights flickered like stars. Good, because tonight was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the real battle begins. And with that, King Charles III turned his gaze toward the horizon, determined to finish what he had started. The morning after King Charles III's powerful address, Buckingham Palace was flooded with messages of support from around the country and across the world. Newspapers that had once carried scandalous headlines now praised his courage. Social media, once dominated by whispers and conspiracies, buzzed with hashtags like Stand with the King and Us Truth Over Lies. The tide had turned, but Charles knew that Jonah Hill wouldn't surrender so easily. In the days that followed, Charles's team worked tirelessly to consolidate the momentum. Edward Hawthorne coordinated with the palace's press office to release the evidence they had gathered. Side-by-side comparisons of real and forged documents, transcripts of conversations that exposed Jonah's manipulations, and statements from trusted staff attesting to Charles's honesty. Every lie was met with a fact, every rumor with proof. Slowly but surely, the public saw the full scope of the deception that had been waged against their king. But even as trust began to rebuild, the scars of betrayal lingered. Some staff members still struggled to adjust, their faith shaken by the realization that one of their own had been a traitor. Charles took time each day to meet with them individually, offering his gratitude and his understanding. He reminded them that betrayal said more about the betrayer than those who had been betrayed. One afternoon, Charles met with Camilla and Edward in the palace gardens. The sun shone brightly, its warmth a welcome change after weeks of stormy weather. Charles watched the birds flit between the flower beds, his mind both at ease and still burdened by what lay ahead. "Edward," Charles began, "have we heard anything from Jonah's camp?" Edward shook his head. "Nothing official, sir, but we've received word that he's in hiding, likely consulting with his network, deciding how to respond. He's a master of reinvention. He won't give up easily." Charles nodded. "He's clever. I'll give him that. But we've shown the world his lies. Whatever he tries next, it will be harder to spread his poison." Camilla rested a hand on Charles's arm. "And you've shown the world who you truly are, a leader who stands for honesty and resilience. That means more than any crown ever could." Charles smiled faintly, grateful for her unwavering support. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. This was never just my fight. It was ours." Meanwhile, Parliament had convened to discuss the matter formally. Several members who had once been swayed by Jonah's campaign now spoke in defense of the monarchy, praising Charles's transparency and dedication to the country. The motion to investigate the monarchy's finances, a move Jonah had hoped would bring down the crown, was struck down, replaced instead by a motion to investigate Jonah Hill's network of influence. The hunter had become the hunted. Yet even as the monarchy began to heal, Charles couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Jonah Hill had retreated, but he was still out there, somewhere, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. And Charles knew that modern threats didn't always come from armies at the gates. Sometimes they came from whispers in the dark, from online posts, from carefully crafted lies that spread like wildfire. That night, Charles sat alone in the royal library. The fire crackled gently, casting warm light across the ancient books that lined the shelves. He thought of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and the strength she had shown in her time. He thought of the sacrifices his family had made for the monarchy, of the duty that had been passed down from generation to generation. He vowed that he would honor that duty, not just by wearing the crown, but by defending the values it stood for. Jonah Hill's trap had nearly broken him, but it had also forged him into a stronger, wiser king, one who understood that leadership was not about power or titles, but about standing firm in the face of adversity. As he gazed into the flickering flames, Charles felt a quiet confidence settle over him. He knew that challenges would come again. New enemies would rise and old ones would return. But he also knew that he had faced the worst Jonah Hill could throw at him and emerged victorious. And so, with the weight of history behind him and the strength of his people beside him, King Charles III prepared for whatever lay ahead. Because a true king didn't just survive the trap, he learned from it, and he led with a heart stronger than any crown. Weeks had passed since King Charles III had confronted Jonah Hill's web of lies. The palace, once tense with suspicion, now thrummed with a quiet, determined energy. The staff walked the corridors with renewed purpose. The public, having seen the truth with their own eyes, rallied behind their king. The monarchy had emerged from the storm stronger than ever. Charles stood at the balcony of Buckingham Palace, looking out over the crowds gathered in the courtyard below. Flags waved in the summer breeze, and the sound of cheering drifted up to him like a song of resilience. These were not just subjects. They were his people, and he had fought for their trust. Behind him, Camilla approached, her expression soft but proud. "You did it, Charles. You didn't just defend the monarchy. You made it stronger." Charles turned, gratitude in his eyes. "No, Camilla, we did it. Every single person who stood beside me, who refused to bow to lies and fear. This victory belongs to all of us." A gentle knock at the door announced Edward Hawthorne. He entered with a stack of reports in hand, his posture relaxed for the first time in weeks. "Your Majesty, Parliament has completed their investigation into Jonah Hill's activities. He's facing charges for conspiracy and fraud. His network is being dismantled." Charles nodded. "Justice, then?" Edward smiled faintly. "Yes, sir. And the public support for the monarchy has never been stronger. Polls show overwhelming confidence in your leadership." Charles felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just about surviving a crisis. It was about leading through it. "Then we move forward," he said, his tone resolute. "The monarchy must evolve. We've seen how modern threats can undermine even the strongest institutions. We'll modernize our communications, strengthen transparency, and build bridges with the people. No more shadows, no more secrets." Camilla placed a hand on his arm. "And you'll do it not as a distant ruler, but as a man they trust." Charles smiled, feeling the truth of her words. The monarchy was no longer just a relic of history. It was a living institution that had to earn its place every day. And he was determined to do just that. That evening, Charles delivered one final address to the nation. Dressed simply in a navy suit, he stood in the same secure room where he had once fought back against the lies. Now, though, his tone carried the quiet strength of a man who had faced betrayal, doubt, and fear, and had emerged stronger. "My fellow citizens," he began, "together we have weathered a storm of deception. We have learned that truth is not just a shield, but a light that guides us through the darkest of nights. Let this be a lesson to us all, that in the face of falsehood, unity and courage will always prevail." He paused, his gaze steady. "The monarchy will continue to serve you, not as a symbol of division, but as a beacon of hope. We will adapt, we will modernize, and we will stand beside you, not above you." As he finished, a hush fell across the courtyard outside, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, as if on cue, the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed through the twilight. Charles stepped back from the microphone, his heart full. He had faced Jonah Hill's trap, and won. But more than that, he had faced himself, his fears, his doubts, his own humanity. And he had found the strength to lead, not just as a king, but as a man worthy of his people's trust. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the palace, King Charles III stood tall, a crowned king renewed by truth, resilience, and the unwavering loyalty of his people.